Thank you, Christiane. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for our webinar today. We will be talking about an agency that you might know well or maybe don't know at all, NRCS. There are many different approaches to conservation, most of which can be attributed to Indigenous stewards of natural resources. And the reason why this presentation is centered around conservation framework is that RAFI's primary work in conservation thus far has been to improve access to financial resources for conservation improvements for small to mid-sized farms and BIPOC farmers. Next slide, please. So some guidance for the webinar, just to get everyone on the same page. First off, as has been noted, this webinar is being recorded. The recording and materials will be shared with registrants. Participants will be on mute during the webinar, but you can ask a question during the webinar either in the chat or in the Q&A feature, which is found at the bottom of your Zoom screen, or you can save your question until the end. So really quickly about RAFI. First off, my name is Kavitha. I'm the co-executive director here at RAFI. Skip that part. But about RAFI in general, so our name's a long story. Just call us RAFI, rhymes with taffy. We're a 35-year-old nonprofit based in Pittsboro, North Carolina. Our service area is primarily in the southeastern U.S., including Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. We do have a crisis hotline and policy advocacy work that is on a national level. Our overall mission is to challenge the root causes of unjust food systems, supporting and advocating for economically, racially, and ecologically just farm communities. And our farm service work with small to mid-scale farmers allows us to see firsthand the kind of support that farmers really need. And that helps us to be able to take those needs to the national level from a policy standpoint, be able to support farmers and their communities. We have a few different kind of buckets of work that we work within. For this particular webinar, of course, we'll be talking a lot about our farmer services, which is one-on-one technical assistance, including for NRCS and FSA loan applicants. We do conservation support and disaster response. We also have multiple granting programs for farmers, particularly based around infrastructure and being a beginning farmer. Those are focused on the Southeast and West Caribbean. We have a Farmers of Color network. Our Just Foods program is focused on regionally adapted seeds and pollinator habitat. As I've mentioned, we do have policy work that happens at the federal level. And then finally, we have a program called Come to the Table, which empowers faith communities to help build just food systems through collaboration, capacity building, and advocacy. From here, I'm going to turn it over to Jaimie McGirt, our Conservation Manager, to take us through the rest of the webinar.
Thanks, Kavitha. So for our time together today, we're going to go until 1:30 Eastern Time. We're going to walk through key considerations that ground us in the content today. So kind of like if you had to put on a certain pair of glasses to view all of the material through, that will be that first section. We're going to walk through the major changes that apply the most to the farmer audiences we serve that have happened in both 2025 actually and 2026. We're going to walk through applying to NRCS, particularly to the Regenerative Pilot Program with the amount of information that's currently available. And we're going to talk a little bit about what can improve your chances throughout that application process. So some key considerations where we start. I want to name that we've collected and interpreted these changes that have taken effect so far from a variety of sources, including like a national coalition that we're a member of, as well as with the individual state agencies we have partnered with over the course of now 4 years. And some of this information presented today is coming from North Carolina-based insight that we realize we can easily apply nationally. We expect more changes to come to NRCS programs in 2026. And I know the following is a lot of information. So the way I present is to typically take it a little bit by bit and allow you to kind of digest at your own pace. And of course, this material is recorded and you'll receive that information in your follow-up materials. Some changes make the barriers for small and mid-scale farmers increase. And we're going to walk you through those changes, but kind of compare and contrast what does that mean in terms of your decisions to apply in this fiscal year. And also these changes pose the new opportunities, and we want you to be most informed of those options. And we'll name that the way you experience NRCS depends on a lot of factors. It's going to depend on the statutes or laws set by Congress. It's going to depend on the national rules that our administration currently makes. It will depend on the amount of funding annually and over multiple years, both nationally and then to your states. It will depend on the cost of goods and services in your community and state. And based on who is leading your state's NRCS and their leadership style, you may see your program designed somewhat differently. And your local office staff's attitude and experience level will also shape your experience with the program. Particularly how quickly everyone in this entire national conservation system is adapting to the changes since last year, I think affects all of our ability to both convey information and your experience on the end as farmers, and also just who else in your community and state is applying and how do you rank against them competitively. So the takeaway is that your experience on your farm is very likely going to differ from someone else's, whether you're an entire C or state or even sometimes county apart. So an overview of the changes in the past year. We have NRCS staffing levels that have changed significantly. Climate smart conservation benefits have effectively been cut. Socially disadvantaged benefits for BIPOC farmers and ranchers or farmers of color have changed. There is now a new national batching date, which is effectively your deadline to apply. There's this new Regenerative Pilot Program, the new buzz in USDA terms. So we'll start with our staffing levels. NRCS lost approximately 20,000 staff in 2025, which is a significant amount of the workforce, especially considering how much of the workforce are newer staff and they're still onboarding, even if they've only been in the agency for 5 years. Some field offices were closed and consolidated. Counties and states and area offices, such as the Caribbean, are missing fundamental staff, especially engineers. And engineers are critical staff for approving certain kinds of conservation plans. Field staff have more limited funds to travel to farms, and they also have to ask for permission more often to be granted a farm visit by their supervisor. Fewer staff serving more farmers means these programs are overprescribed or oversubscribed. And staff are still recovering from the government shutdown. After over an entire month of being out of operation, they are coming into their offices, playing catch up, and now post-holidays are presented with a brand new program, a brand new national deadline. It's a lot to cope with. Also, there's been this change, a couple of changes that have created much easier access for the largest farms in our country. The adjusted gross income used to be a way to limit producers of a certain income scale from applying and receiving contracts. So now applicants are allowed to earn more than $900,000 annually. So no limit means the highest earning farms are eligible, and this is effectively going to reduce the amount of funding that can be available for smaller scale operations. There's no guidance to states yet, to our knowledge, but farmers should still complete the AGI form, which makes you eligible for NRCS. This is a form that gets turned into the Farm Service Agency. We have Spanish and English forms linked. The other change is the increased payment limitations also make room for larger contracts. The EQIP contract payment limitation has remained at $450,000, but the CSP limitation was increased to $300,000. So here's a big one. Programs with socially disadvantaged benefits. A quick review for those of you who don't know what socially disadvantaged farmer or rancher means. It's the way USDA identifies BIPOC producers. So this includes Black or African American, Indigenous, Latino and Hispanic, Asian, Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander identities. You might ask, well, aren't women socially disadvantaged? Not for NRCS, but yes, for Farm Service Agency programs. Socially disadvantaged was deemed unconstitutional as of July in 2025 for specific USDA programs. Thus, these farmers will not receive the extra benefits solely based on the history of discrimination towards them by USDA. So these are the programs now without socially disadvantaged benefits. And as you scan through, whether or not you're familiar with those bulleted here, you might notice some key ones missing. And that would be the EQIP, the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, and CSP, the Conservation Stewardship Program. So we have this myth. The USDA socially disadvantaged designation is gone for all USDA programs. Well, the fact is that it's gone for specific USDA programs. Okay, it is protected in statute for EQIP and CSP to offer increased financial benefits and separate ranking categories for farmers who fall under the socially disadvantaged category. But as we've seen, the administration is pushing this boundary, and we are remaining vigilant for more attempts to subvert this socially disadvantaged designation. Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay. So our tip is to watch out for any incorrect information or guidance. And if you experience this, you're welcome to contact RAFI for more support. So here's another big change, the national NRCS application deadline. It's January 15th this year. We haven't had a national deadline, I think, at least in many years. The Southeast typically has deadlines set in the fall months, sometimes in the first 2 weeks of the opening of the fiscal year, which can make it very challenging for producers to apply. A uniform date like January 15th across the country actually has the opportunity to widen access for a lot of farmers who can rely on a consistent date. This is sometimes referred to as a batching date. You might hear people call it a ranking date, and it's going to apply for all US states, and it will also be including Puerto Rico and the US Virgin Islands. We actually don't know if the January 15th date will be a deadline every year, so we're going to keep monitoring that, and we always post ranking dates on RAFI's blog or website. So again, this is your deadline, effectively, to apply and be considered for funding that you could receive in this calendar 2026 year. And this deadline is going to apply to the following programs: EQIP, CSP, ACEP, and AMA. Now, this new Regenerative Pilot Program is falling under EQIP and CSP. We'll talk more about that. So the myth that I commonly hear, like, you can't apply after the ranking date. Well, the fact is you can apply after a ranking date, such as January 15th, but your chances of financial assistance are going to be very slim. Applications are accepted year-round, but funding can and often does run out after the first batching date of the fiscal year in the majority of states. If states do have remaining funds after that first deadline period, they will open another batching date, which will be posted publicly, and applications that were not awarded from the first round will be carried over, and also new applications can be considered. So even if you miss that date, it can still be a critical move to put your application in. And so an example would be that if I miss the January 15th deadline and I enter my application in January at the end of the month on the 31st, then my application is going to sit in a different stack. It's going to be in like a pending stack and not in this first batch of applications that made it into that January 15th deadline. So another big change, the Climate Smart Conservation Initiative. Climate Smart is a term that's gone from USDA operations and programs. The Inflation Reduction Act, or IRA funding, has essentially been redistributed to pre-existing NRCS programs from now until 2032. So if you see the piggy bank image on the right, it's like there was a single batch of funds for the IRA to allow NRCS for farmers to apply and implement practices or conservation practices that mitigate climate change, such as sequestering carbon in their forest or farmland, but also reducing emissions from the first place. Now it's like that single piggy bank doesn't exist. The money from that fund has been redistributed, like you see in the multiple jars. And it's going to be spread across the years until 2032. In 2026, this year, programs will have less funding than they did in 2024. And we ask, is there enough to go around? Definitely not. But is farmer interest high? Absolutely. So with climate smart funding gone, the myth might be there are no more climate smart conservation practices. And I want to make sure we understand today that practices that have climate benefits actually haven't gone anywhere. And if you truly want climate benefiting practices integrated into your farm that remove carbon from the atmosphere or reduce emissions preventatively, the outdated climate smart list is still publicly available and linked here. So these same practices that were available before IRA funding are still available now. They're just not labeled as climate smart. And now some of these are labeled as regenerative. So we're getting to the big one, the new Regenerative Pilot Program. I know interest is high about this topic. It was announced December 2025 and aims to help farmers create a comprehensive whole farm conservation plan. It allocates funding for EQIP and CSP contracts that include a practice, at least one practice, labeled as regenerative by the USDA. Regenerative practices are supposed to do all of the following. They regenerate natural resources on a farm or non-industrial forest land and improve productivity in those spaces. They also increase biodiversity. 25% of each state's funds will be used to fund these regenerative contracts. The thing we want to emphasize is that while the press release indicates how much money is going to be allocated to EQIP and CSP, this is not new funding on top of what was existing at the end of 2025. This is significant because it means the state receives a certain amount of funding to redistribute to farmers in a single fiscal year. And 25% of that has to be set aside for regenerative contracts. So our question is, how does NRCS want this to work? From our review, it's pretty basic. They want you and your local NRCS to complete a whole farm assessment first. And then you go through this tag team whole farm conservation planning process, which creates a whole farm regenerative conservation plan. And then you simply implement the regenerative practices in your plan. Well, somewhat of a myth is that it's this innovative pilot program that solves years of problems. The fact is the Regenerative Pilot Program is a top-down redesign that bears both benefits and drawbacks for small and mid-scale farms. So how can state NRCS leaders make this work when it has essentially been handed down to them to operationalize as soon as possible? Your state's going to be determining the following. When will this whole farm assessment take place with farms and staff? How do we reorient field staff to an older style of conservation planning? This style of conservation planning was common at NRCS anywhere between 5 to 10 years ago, but the agency had moved to more single area conservation planning on farms. How applications will rank This is in process in each state. North Carolina is particularly looking for insight, and your state might be too. Like, how do these regenerative practices that we'll review soon align with you as a farmer in that state? Is whole farm planning strongly desired, or did you actually prefer the more singular unit conservation planning, like only on cropland or only on your pasture areas? And now we come to, how do you as the producer make this work? So here is our best step-by-step approach, and I'm going to review these all together, and then we're going to go through them in step-by-step order. So the first step is to just understand NRCS overall, and we're going to breeze through that. That is normally a multi-hour presentation that RAFI offers, but we're doing our best to summarize it in this setting. Understand specifically the Regenerative Pilot Program next, and quickly assess if this pilot program is right for you and your farm. Consider alternatives. Apply by the January 15th deadline if it's a fit. Be communicative with your local NRCS staff that you'd be working with. And take care of related paperwork ASAP. And finally, be patient and start setting priorities for yourself and doing your own form of conservation planning while you wait for this program to take shape. So we start with understanding NRCS overall. First, NRCS is focused on the repair or the improvement of natural resources. This includes soil, water, air, plants, wildlife, and other vegetation, habitat, and energy on your farm. Then the flagship program that provides financial assistance to farmers is the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, or EQIP. This is for both first-time conservation adopters and return conservation adopters, and the program that is better for infrastructure and engineering needs because of the way the payment rates are set. The Conservation Stewardship Program is the program for farmers that have already been improving natural resource conditions. And I'll note that that can be with or without NRCS's help. You do not have to have applied for EQIP and had an EQIP contract to apply and implement CSP on your farm. However, this is a common thing I hear shared in the field between NRCS staff and farmers. Over to the right, NRCS financial assistance is a competitive process. And if you're not registered with FSA from the beginning, you're just out of the race. Cost share does tend to improve each year, meaning the rates for individual conservation practices increase due to inflation, but you will still have out-of-pocket costs no matter what. And you should always expect that those out-of-pocket costs will come up higher than you expected. Lastly, your relationship with local staff matters a lot. It can really make or break your experience with NRCS. So your eligibility, it starts with Farm Service Agency. If you are not registered with FSA and do not have a farm and tract number, you will not be able to apply for NRCS assistance. You could submit an application, but your application is going to sit in kind of a void. So we've prepared English and Spanish links for the form to apply for an FSA farm and tract number. I'll note that parts of your farm record with FSA need to be updated annually. And we have a couple of handy links here, like how to apply for a farm number and also how to keep your Farm Service Agency farm record up to date. And I'll note that these agencies are often neighboring offices in the same building, but communication between them can be limited. So you'd start with, do you have a farm record? Yes. You need to update your farm record with FSA ASAP. And then you are program eligible with NRCS. If you do not have a farm record, you need to create this, You need to create a farm record with FSA, and the worksheet or form looks like this displayed. Then you are program eligible. This is an example from my personal farm of a farm record. The farm number that we often hear reference is up in the top right-hand corner, circled. And you should check that all of the information, such as the amount of acreage on your total farmland and areas of your farmland, are accurate on this page. And your farm record will also include an aerial and land use map. So it's going to indicate your property boundaries. And then as you see, yellow encircled is our designated cropland. And once again, you'll see that farm and the tract number in the upper right-hand corner. I definitely recommend that when FSA generates this map with these property lines and your field boundaries, that you check it and make sure it's accurate. So next, do you have a contact at your local NRCS? Have you spoken to someone in your field office before? Do you remember how the staff are stretched super thin and adapting like all of us right now? I promise they will feel more respected if you reach out to them in writing or by phone before you submit an application. I won't say you can't just submit an application via farmers.gov or through email or sending it to the office, but at this time, I think they will really appreciate your effort to reach out. And if you're feeling rushed by the January 15th deadline and express your intent to apply, when they're feeling rushed, they'll at least know that they're expecting your application coming. So here's how to find your FSA and NRCS offices. You could just Google, find my local USDA service center, or you can follow these two links provided. So there's also this hidden program eligibility I like to cover, which is about resource concerns. And it's the entire reason why NRCS exists in the first place. NRCS programs will require there to be issues with natural resource conditions, and they call these resource concerns, in order for you to actually access financial assistance. EQIP is one of the most common programs, and you will need evident and assess resource concerns on your farm or forest land. You might also have some expected resource concerns coming in the coming production year based on your management or production methods. Also, resource concerns, just think about them as they start as point A and they can be measurably improved to point B by applying a conservation practice in that place on the farm. CSP is a little bit different. It is going to require that you have addressed two resource concerns and resolved these problems to a certain threshold. So you have moved from point A to point B already, somewhere or in multiple places on your farm. And you also would need to select one new resource concern or problem that you want to address by the end of a 5-year practice. And you would address this resource concern that is newly added through one or more conservation practices. So these are two standard programs that pre-existed before the Regenerative Pilot Program. A few myths about NRCS eligibility. So the number of years you have farmed, there's actually no minimum years of production required to participate with NRCS. However, you do have to have some form of agricultural production of an agricultural product or forest land or rangeland farm areas that you are trying to manage for improved wildlife habitat. There's a myth that you have to have a minimum income from farming. I've heard floated around that you have to earn at least $3,000 per year to access NRCS. There's actually no minimum income or profit or loss statements required to submit to NRCS. But again, you do have to be in active production, and NRCS will need to see that on the ground when they visit. Minimum acreage. There is no minimum acreage requirement. Minimum volume in production. It's not about volume. So community gardens, subsistence farms, backyard gardeners, you can qualify. Lands used for foraging, hunting, fishing, those can qualify. Even just land that you like to walk and use for your personal enjoyment, such as forests, that can qualify. But there has to be natural resource concerns present in those places. And they have to be able to be resolved through applying one or more conservation practices. So for the history of production myth, you don't need to turn in crop records like you might to Farm Service Agency programs. But for certain conservation practices, you might need to show some form of history, such as irrigation practices. You might need to show that you have been irrigating your crops, but unsuccessfully or in a limited way for 3 years. And location is also a myth. Farms in any location are permitted to apply. So we're gonna now kind of dive deep into the regenerative pilot, because now I hope you understand at a broad level NRCS, and now we're gonna understand specifically this new regenerative pilot program. The four main tenets of this program include a whole farm assessment, required soil testing at both the beginning and the end of a 5-year contract period. Your contract would need to at least include one regenerative conservation practice. Regenerative is in quotes because it means there's a specific list of which practices are called regenerative. And then optionally, you can add supporting or additional conservation practices that don't necessarily have this regenerative label. So for the whole farm assessment, this is what we know. This is essentially an inventory of environmental conditions of all of the natural resources on all areas of your farm, supporting the production of crops and wildlife habitat. This is a very beneficial and critical thing for higher impact conservation planning because it takes an ecological approach. It's considering how both the human and non-human and natural environments are interacting together. But this is messy. States are figuring out how and when to do this step at the same time that you are wanting to apply for this service. And so I like to share this quote because I have actually heard this more than one occasion, but in the field once I heard an NRCS staff person state, we're not going to go looking around the whole farm for resource concerns. So this has been the mentality that staff, or at least some staff, have carried for several years. They've essentially been trained out of looking around the whole farm for a full or holistic conservation plan. And so one way that you can be prepared for this shift is be prepared when they visit your farm for this question of what are your goals? And this is a question you'll have to unpack a little bit. What's behind this question is actually what are your resource concerns and how can NRCS do something about those problems on your farm? So I recommend that you have a list of your land use areas, the problems you encounter on those land use areas, and the practices that you think would help solve some of your problems. Land use areas could mean cropland, it can mean pasture or grazing land, that includes hay fields. It can include areas around your farm, which might be called farmstead. It can include buildings that need energy efficiency improvements, and it can include forest land and around waterways or buffers around those waterways. So when NRCS comes to your farm, I recommend you do a walk and talk. This is when you walk through each land area use relevant to your coming needs. You should describe and show practices or techniques, management styles you have done well to date. So take this opportunity to just like show off, right? Show what you've been doing really well on your farm. Show any irrigation methods, including if you have been hand watering with a can, because that is the only way you can get water to your crops. Show inadequacies or inefficiencies, the issues at hand. Is it too little water? Is it inefficient flowing water? Is it a nutrient inefficiency or inadequacy? And you have thus crop failure as a result. You want to describe the priorities and the needed timelines for action. So NRCS is going to have timelines, but you are in a place during this farm visit to put what you want into a priority list or order and describe when you need these actions to take place. And this is key, and this is what gets missed so much of the time. When you and NRCS are walking your farm together, write down any practices that you both discuss and where they would apply. So start organizing your notes, like you have your cropland, and these are the practices you are brainstorming for these issues on your cropland. And then you have your grazing land or pasture list over here. And then ask about the details of each practice. So if you and the NRCS staff are starting to talk about practices applied and the longevity of those practices, ask things like, how do I know I am finished with this conservation practices? What does it look like, or what does it need to look like to you to be finished and to receive my payment for the practice being complete? Also, it doesn't hurt to ever mention where the food you grow is sold or consumed and why your farm matters. So if all of your food is being distributed within a 50-mile radius of your farm, talk that up. The more they know about your farm, the better. And determine if there's going to be follow-up needed and who is responsible for doing what. So what's on your task list and what's on NRCS's task list. So the required soil testing feature, like I said, this is at the beginning and at the end of a 5-year contract. So sometime during year 1, sometime during year 5. What we know is that this is also a very beneficial and critical service for all in-ground crops, your forage production, for livestock, and pasture management. It can even be beneficial in forest farming operations, particularly if you need to apply gypsum for forest botanical products. NRCS contracts will cost share the cost of testing. If you have already tested, say through your cooperative extension this fall, you will need to retest at the beginning of your contract, and the cost would be covered. Testing is a technical conservation practice that would need to be adhered to certain standards. So it may be a different process than what you've been used to in the past. At this stage, it's also unclear who will perform this testing and the analysis to provide you the results. So a little bit about the primary conservation practices, kind of point or pillar 3 of the Regenerative Pilot Program. These are the practices, and I apologize for the strange formatting, but it's not a long list. It's much shorter than the climate smart agriculture and forestry mitigation list. As you see listed, and I've put them kind of in somewhat of an order, there are those that apply to easily to cropland. There are those that apply very specifically to forest land, such as forest stand improvement. And some of these sound very intuitive, like cover crop, residue and tillage management, no-till, contour farming or farming on the contour, mulching. However, some don't sound so clear-cut. Like, what exactly is forage harvest management? That's essentially hay cutting for optimal hay growth and optimal feed source for your livestock. Here's another view of the conservation practices. These 3-digit codes are provided because sometimes NRCS forgets that they talk in code, and they might say, oh, we can apply 340 over here, and that's not the code you speak. So don't ever hesitate to speak up and say, can you tell me what that means? And they would explain that means cover crop. What's also nifty about this chart is it indicates where this conservation practice can apply and where it can't. And so this is what we know about the optional or supporting and additional practices that you can add to these regenerative pilot contracts. Any practices needing financial assistance must be written into the whole farm conservation plan. This doesn't obligate you to getting financial assistance. You'll actually need to request financial assistance for each of the practices within this plan. These supporting practices directly relate to the success of a regenerative practice, whereas other practices could be any one or more of almost over 200 practices. And a key thing not to forget is that of these other practices, they have to be practices offered in your individual state. So if you're at a conference and you hear your friend talking about these low tunnel systems that were cost shared on their farm, and you go to your NRCS and start talking up or requesting low tunnels, that might not be an active practice in your state yet. And this isn't meant to read through in detail, but it's just to give you a quick glimpse of just how many conservation practices there are. And these are some of the, I think, the most productive and proactive practices, and I've organized them by land use area. And these are particularly practices that I have seen and I would love to see established on more small scale and mid-scale farms. So what's critical to know about practices, whether the practice is in a regenerative pilot contract or another type of contract? Each practice has a lifespan, and practices have to follow specifications or sets of rules. And these specifications tell the producer what the purpose of the practice is, where it can be applied, how it needs to look when it's applied, sometimes complementary conservation practices that go along with it. You can pretty much find the specifications for any practice online, but that's where you do have to be careful to make sure you are looking at practices available in your state and not someone else's state. Financial assistance means cost share. And so in brief, NRCS is going to pay a percentage of a total conservation practice cost, and you're going to pay the remaining out of pocket. What NRCS pays is typically a reimbursement. Only historically underserved producers can request the advance payment. And that's where you can request it and receive 50% of that practice payment up front. But the caveat is, a very important caveat, is that you have to use it within 90 days of those funds hitting your bank account. The practice does not have to be finished within 90 days, but the funds have to be used. And then the remaining 50% is paid on a reimbursement basis. So each practice in a contract is also going to have an individual payment rates. Payment rates are now open online, so I think you can search NRCS payment rates and find your way on the national website, but also know those payment rates are modified in each state because the costs should be uniquely set by your states. Okay, so now we're at this assessment stage. Is this regenerative pilot for me? Well, here's what we think is positive. The whole farm assessment is a great ecological approach, but here are the potential challenges we anticipate for you. It's going to take patience, and you might be ready for this process, but NRCS still isn't. They have too little staff and too little time to really effectively carry this out the way that I think the national office dreams it to be. And you still have to compete against other regenerative pilot program applicants. So some other positives. There are positives to the conservation practices we viewed on the list. And there's also the fact that these are now 5-year contracts. They give you a little more time and flexibility for implementation. On the flip side, there's potential challenges, like something from this list has to really work for you and the farm in order to qualify. I strongly encourage you not to apply for the Regenerative Pilot Program just because you think it's going to give you better access to NRCS. Because at the end of the day, you are financially responsible for the implementation. So you should only implement what you genuinely want to have set up on your farm. Also, there's lots of missing practices that are very climate beneficial. So what's available is just kind of inherently challenging. Some of the things that you might be most excited to do, like tree and shrub establishment or pollinator habitat installation, it's not on this list. And also the drawback of the 5-year contracts is that it does lock you and your land into a financial and risky obligation. So this is where you understand NRCS, you understand the regenerative pilot, and you're kind of assessing what's the cost benefit, and you might consider the alternatives to the regenerative pilot program. So NRCS has regular EQIP and CSP and nearly 200 practices. And you could select any one or more that could be a better fit for you than what's on the regenerative list. It's the same deadline this year, January 15th, for everyone in the country and our outlying islands, but you're going to rank differently than the regenerative pilot program participants if you apply for regular EQIP and CSP. Your county soil and water conservation district might also be a great resource. You can apply to both, actually. You can apply to both for the same thing, but I guarantee these staff are talking to each other in the office, so you should keep them informed that you have applied to both, and better yet, have them both out to your farm at the same time to determine which one might be the better resource for your farm. Soil and water conservation districts are a different source of funding, and they have different cost share rates. They also call their conservation practices best management practices. Also consider nonprofit grants that can be more flexible than a rigid federally funded conservation practice to implement. Also, there are the FSA microloans. So step 5, let's say you're ready, you want to apply to NRCS programs or maybe specifically the regenerative pilot. Applying by the 15th is just getting your foot in the door. It's not committing yourself to anything. Submitting an application form is not the same as a contract. You'll need to complete the form CPA 1200 linked here, and we'll link it at the end of the webinar. And I encourage you to make a copy that you keep. And once it is submitted and it is entered into the system and other documentation follows, make sure you are requesting versions of those documents that NRCS keeps on file. With this form, you can email, mail, or deliver it to your local NRCS staff. Be sure to ask for a receipt for service after you submit this. This is your guaranteed documentation that you did turn in an application form. You can find our quick reference instructions to apply linked here. And please know you can always withdraw, defer, or modify your application after you've submitted it and anytime before you sign a contract, and there's no harm done. For the CPA application form on the right, you get a glimpse of what the first page looks like. And you'll note that there is just one box circled in red of the assistance requested. And this is genuinely a very small box. My best guidance is for you to briefly describe where on the farm you want to make improvements. So in my crop field or in my western pasture, and note what improvements you want to make. If you know any conservation practices by name or close to their names, go ahead and note those conservation practices in this box. A tip we got from North Carolina NRCS is that if you are going to apply for the regenerative program, you'll note there's no checkbox for that on this form, but you can write in the blank where it asks assistance requested, just write regenerative pilot program. This is the other pages. You'll note that on the left side, there is a place to indicate if you identify as socially disadvantaged, a veteran, a beginning farmer and rancher, or a limited resource farmer rancher. If you are applying as an entity, there are specific rules for entities to apply under those identities. And then lastly, you want to make sure you sign and date. Like I said, make a copy of your signed version with the date. So 6.7, you'll want to communicate with NRCS and complete forms. Next, you're going to save your local NRCS staff phone number in your phone. Don't delay, just do it, because then every time they call or text you, you see who's calling and you know to not delay and call them back as soon as possible. I text with my soil conservationist as a quick way to exchange information or some pictures that she needs to add to my files, and it works great. I recommend you save all communication with NRCS staff. Because you can't save a phone call, I recommend you record phone conversations in a log. So beyond taking notes, you want to note who you spoke to, on what day, and the topics of conversation. And if any requests or decisions are made, request this documentation in a receipt for service. You'll look out for any communication about applying your completing your FSA eligibility paperwork. That notification could come from your NRCS contact or from FSA themselves. And you can also find our instructions here in English only for updating your FSA paperwork. So a bit about FSA farm record forms. You can always ask Farm Service Agency, are my forms up to date or active? And one of our staff taught me a new term recently, and maybe Amanda can put that in the chat, but there's something you can specifically ask from FSA that gives you a printout of all of the records you have on file for the current year with FSA. A little bit of a shortcut. You'll need the adjusted gross income at this time still in English or Spanish, your farm operation plan for an individual or an entity. This is one of the most complex forms to complete for Farm Service Agency. So I always recommend that you get on the phone with FSA or you go to the office to fill it out with their assistance. And then the members information form 901, that's for entities only. And then if you have never completed the highly erodible land and wetland form, you'll need to do this at least once, or if you have done any major earthwork or wetland compromising work on your land, or it has become highly erodible, that's when you need to fill a new one out. And then for certain programs, you can fill out the historically underserved farmer and rancher form. I often recommend farmers to fill this out and file it with Farm Service Agency, but NRCS will enter your historically underserved information via the Conservation Program application from a prior page. So why I link all of these forms is not because it's your responsibility to memorize this, but in my experience, FSA or NRCS staff will say, hey, I need you to fill out this form. And they don't necessarily link the form in the email or tell you where to find it. And if you go on a search on your own, you might be filling out an outdated form and they have to ask you to do it all over again. So sometimes I recommend just going ahead and like printing it and bringing it with you. If it is outdated by the time you get there, they'll let you know, and at least you were prepared. Lastly, this is where, and we can't tell you how long this is going to be, but wait and be patient and do your own planning. We want you to just go ahead and expect a quiet period, because unless NRCS staff need to clarify some questions or they need to confirm which practices you've decided, or they need to come out and take measurements, you're likely not going to hear from them from the point that you finish conservation planning to when your application is ranked and kind of sitting in a pile of either being pre-approved or not approved at all. Don't be afraid to call, like pick up the phone or email and say, hey, how's my application in the ranking process? Do you think I will receive a contract this year? And they may or may not be able to tell you. But particularly with the Regenerative Pilot Program, this is where like our patience might be tested the most, because we just really don't know entirely how each state is going to design the conservation planning process. But this is when you can be proactive and look for cost estimates to understand your total out-of-pocket costs. And you can communicate with NRCS about any changes that happen. So if something like really drastic happens with your health and you need to cancel your application, this is when you would do it. If something is changing within your operation and you need to adjust a practice, absolutely let them know as soon as possible. And do not start a conservation practice that you have applied for at this time. You should not start one of these practices until it is under contract.
Hey, Jaimie, I just wanted to jump in and go back to that report you mentioned on the
Mhm.
previous slide. If folks want to ask their FSA staff for the subsidiary print report for the 2026 program year, that's the report that FSA can provide that'll list out all of their eligibility forms that have been filed.
Great. So the subsidiary report for that fiscal year.
Yes,
Thanks, Amanda. Appreciate that.
you're welcome.
So these are the potential outcomes we forecast if you apply by the deadline or you apply after the deadline. If you apply, you're going to go through this waiting period. You can at least take care of forms, and then you'd work within your state's process for whole farm assessment and make your way through this kind of ideal process that USDA has laid out. And this is what is most likely to change, or new information will be coming out by probably mid to late February. So it doesn't hurt to make contact with your agent. Definitely if you're going to turn in an application, but just stay in touch with them. And as soon as they have the information to actually help you, I hope they will reach out. But if you feel like you have not heard back and it has been too long, don't be afraid to reach back out to them. I guarantee their caseload is just going to be very high. Now, if you apply after January 15th, you'll need to likely stand by until more dates are announced. And remember, there might not be another date that year. Your application will effectively roll over to the next opportunity. So in all, we feel strongly that everything in this pilot program offers for farmers has the potential to benefit like nearly any kind of farm anywhere. But the timing and the conditions at NRCS surrounding its release means staff are stressed, and small to mid-sized farms once again could be left out like they traditionally have. And that's why we take this information and we try to put it into a farmer-facing format with farmer input and provide it to you. And we hope that you will go on to actually be great purveyors of high quality and accurate information that help your farming and neighbor communities. So we close with asking, will you rule regenerative in or out? And we're going to shift to Q&A. My colleagues have been monitoring the question and answer feature as well as the chat. So I welcome my colleagues to come off mute, briefly introduce yourselves, and I welcome any of my colleagues to speak up. And I know we have a variety of professionals also with us today. Please feel free to chime in the chat. I feel like the more information and the more knowledge, the merrier.
Thanks, Jaimie. Hi, I'm T. Turner. I'm the Farm Services Director. Got a bit of questions that asked about people's particular operations, and just for the sake of time, I will ask those folks if it's possible to follow up with us or follow up with Jaimie on an individual level, so we can answer some of the more general questions about some of the information Jaimie went over. I will start with someone asking, because this was kind of common. They got a denial back in December on their EQIP application, and they were wondering if the January 15th batching date, should they reapply, or is the denial for the January 15th date, or was that for a previous batching date?
I imagine that's for a previous batching date. The best way to check is to follow up with your soil conservationist or other NRCS contact and specifically ask is your application still in the system? It should be if you've received this notification, but ask, is it in the system and is it rolling over? Now, the key thing to also ask is, what was this application specifically for? I would like to understand what it had me signed up for, so that I can have the opportunity to make any changes if possible. That is when NRCS might reply and say, this is what was in your application. Let's say it was for high tunnel, cover crop, and gutters to catch rainfall from your high tunnel. And you did not receive a contract. This application with these 3 conservation practices would effectively roll over, but only one of those practices I named is on the Regenerative Pilot Program list. So that's kind of lucky for you, I think, because your application rolling over could potentially be set into that regenerative pilot kind of pot of funding, that 25% set aside in your state. If your application from the prior year did not contain one of these regenerative practices, then it may be the case that you're going to need to submit a new application, indicate your interest in the regenerative program, and that would be your safest bet to guarantee that you have a foot in the door. The worst case scenario with this is the staff have one more piece of paperwork to manage. Sorry, staff on the call, but this is the best guarantee for the farmer to have a chance at assistance in 2026.
Thank you, Jaimie. Let's see. I'm trying to look at some of the ones that were. Oh, someone asked, if you have a CSP contract, are you not allowed to make changes to your farm for the full 5-year contract period? For example, what happens if you want to plant fruit trees after I've already signed a contract?
Okay, this is a great question. So I'm not going to be able to answer this in terms of can your new conservation practice request be funneled through the Regenerative Pilot Program. I do know we have a CSP specialist on the call today out of Kansas, but being a specialist, this gentleman could lend his perspective in the chat if he is able. One thing to note generally, though, is that if you have a CSP contract, which is 5 years long, you cannot add practices. You can only remove practices or delay a practice within that contract to be finished at a later time in the 5-year period. But look out in the chat for any more information we can get from the CSP specialist here with us today.
Okay, and go back up because I had a really good one that I wanted to get to.
Sorry.
Oh man, because I felt like this was helpful to a lot of people. Sorry.
That's okay.
I just looked at it.
I bet y'all have great questions.
They do.
My
Have a
head's been
lot.
spinning for weeks, y'all.
Oh, so I'll ask this one while I look for the one that I was really for. Any advice that you would have for anyone who has previously applied for EQIP and have been deferred?
Okay. I wonder if deferred means you feel like your application was unfunded and you received confirmation that it was rolled over, or if you mean that maybe your application never went through or you weren't fully considered as an applicant. In the case that your application was rolled over, I'd apply like the same advice from before to take this opportunity to reach out to your conservationist as early as possible and indicate your interest in reapplying and that you want to understand what was on that original application and if you should make any changes or submit a new form. In the case that you've applied in the past and you kind of feel like you're beating your head against the wall, you've tried and tried and tried and you just get denied, or you're not even confident that you're getting the service maybe you should, that's a time to reach out to an advocate like RAFI or other organizations offer. We're really fortunate to have a fantastic new network in the Midwest of technical assistance providers who are ready to take referrals for those of you in some Midwestern states. RAFI has technical assistance spread throughout the Southeast to assist you if you're in that region. And I know several other organizations who might be on the call also assist producers, but this is when it can be really helpful to have like a second set of ears and talk through the challenges you've experienced and try to determine if it's been a communication challenge or like a best fit type challenge. Like sometimes producers genuinely want to access the NRCS resources, but it's not the best financial program for their operation. Sometimes there's other USDA programs, or sometimes they're not simply a fit at that time. But other times that kind of one-on-one assistance can like take you that last 100 miles, it can feel like, to the finish line. And farmers we've been able to serve with that type of assistance get successful contracts, and they get higher value and better quality contracts as a result.
Thank you, Jaimie. Someone put in the chat, Jeffrey Olsen said, when you're speaking of applications rolling over, you should be aware that deferral letter now states, please notify the local NRCS field office of your decision to defer or cancel your application. The telephone number for the field office is, and it's a blank there for that number. If you do not contact the local NRCS field office within 30 days of receiving this letter, NRCS will cancel your application due to no response. You may choose to reapply anytime, but be sure to contact your NRCS office to make sure they know you want to continue.
Wow, thank you. Thank you, Jeffrey. See, this is why it's important to have a community of people in places like this, because the information is changing so rapidly, and I was not aware of this change, which is really significant. So I think to repeat that, the what has become tradition of an application in NRCS's system going unfunded and then rolling over to the next batch or the next year is no longer the case. If they do not hear from you within, I think it was 30 days, then your application
That's correct, 30 days.
would be canceled. NRCS, due to limited staff capacity at this time, like severely limited staff capacity, may receive instructions from supervisors of how to prioritize applicants. And so this is the time to be more proactive than you ever have before in staying in close communication and contact with your NRCS. Thanks again, Jeffrey.
Someone asked if they already have a CSP contract that's active now, can they still apply? And the answer to that is yes, right, Jaimie?
Yes. If you have an active contract, it's going to depend when that contract ends and where that contract is for the farm. So if that contract is over your like crop, any pasture land, anything non-forest land, then all of that land is locked into that 5-year contract. If you have a forested property in the same track or a different track, then that would be eligible for a different and new CSP contract. Now, once again, I'm going to defer to our fabulous CSP specialist on the call, because if guidance coming out specifically about the Regenerative Pilot Program under CSP changes this, we'd all love to know.
And someone else asked, can entities or organizations apply to carry out conservation practices for farms, i.e. making annual soil testing available for farms for free?
Can you repeat that one more time?
Can entities or organizations apply to carry out conservations for farms, making annual soil testing available for farms for free?
Um, I haven't seen much specifics about this yet. For the Regenerative Pilot Program, NRCS does seem to be like opening invitation to partners and for TSPs, technical service providers, to assist, I think, in the whole farm conservation assessment process. I don't know about TSPs being certified to run the soil testing process. That was unknown as of mid-December.
And then this question is the new batching deadline, does the new batching deadline mean that EQIP applications submitted by the state in August of 25 is the deadline for FY 26 will now be competing with the influx of additional applications being submitted with this extended deadline?
That's a great question. So, due to the government shutdown, states were beginning to come out with announcements of extended batching date or ranking date deadlines for farmers, just having sympathy for the situation, especially many of the southeastern states' deadlines fell during the shutdown. So it's a rather helpless situation, right? So I saw states like South Carolina pushing their deadline back. I think Virginia Virginia didn't. But regardless, states were starting to make that move when the news of the new national deadline hit. And to be honest, I think all of these applications are likely going to be considered on one hand together, but at the same time, remember that anyone applying for the Regenerative Pilot Program, their application is going to rank specifically amongst the other applicants applying for the Regenerative Pilot Program. This is because states have the ability to set what is called ranking pools. So you can imagine your application being turned in and let's say 3 copies get made. 1 copy of your application goes behind door number 1 because you're a beginning farmer and rancher. The second copy of your application goes behind the socially disadvantaged farmer and rancher pool because you are a young Black farmer. It's going to go behind door number 2. And then finally, your application, because it has a regenerative practice and you're interested in the soil testing and the 5-year contract, it's going to go behind door number 3. So your application could, in theory, rank 3 different times and stand 3 chances, which is an excellent thing. Someone who is applying to just regular EQIP or CSP, but has that same demographic identity, their application also might rank in a couple of different ways, but their application is not going to rank in that Regenerative Pilot Program pool. You know, I say this somewhat generally because states have not decided what pools they are going to have for this fiscal year. That's how fresh this pilot program is. So states are determining how to rank these applicants really as we speak.
And there were a lot of questions about the priorities, Jaimie. So if there were changes coming for 26 to the ranking priorities or the process for how the priorities are decided upon.
Okay. I love that folks are informed about the ranking process and want to know about priorities. So 2 points here. The priorities, conservation priorities are set in a couple of places. So NRCS nationally sets kind of like broad sweeping priorities that are predominantly to protect soil and water resources. States have the ability through something called the State Technical Advisory Committees, which bring together NRCS professionals from across engineering and grazing and crop science and other specialties, as well as community members, to discuss what state set priorities should be. So that's like level number 2. Then we reach what's called the local working group. This is level number 3, where farmers in your county or multiple county area can attend the local working group that's conducted by your local NRCS and often includes your soil and water conservation district staff, sometimes cooperative extension staff, other area nonprofits concerned about conservation, and like-minded farmers. This is a meeting that happens once or more annually. Sometimes the dates are not well announced publicly, but you can ask your NRCS Conservation for the date of your next local working group. And that is where this group decides together what the local priorities for conservation should be. And they actually go so far as to draft or change the ranking questions for funding that is set aside specifically for locally ranked contracts. The kinds of questions I've seen in local working groups really run the gamut. But in Virginia, I've seen a question like, does this producer's food get distributed within a 50-mile radius of the farm? Yes or no? If it's yes, they get a certain number of points. If it's no, they get 0 points. And this point system can make or break somebody's chance. And sometimes it comes down to like the 100th decimal point in a ranking. So it's not to say that every state has that kind of ranking question like Virginia. Other states might have a question like, does this applicant plan to plant 3 or more species of cover crop? If it's yes, then that producer gets more points than the producer who's only planting 1 species of cover crop. You can stay tuned with RAFI's Policy Action Network because RAFI has been organizing more and more grassroots opportunities for farmers to get more involved in local NRCS functions. So that's a great way to stay plugged in to that kind of work. I think we have time for 2 more questions.
I was just about to ask that. Oh, someone said in their experience, the cost share was not a percentage. It was a specific amount were set for practices, which was X dollars times X linear feet, for example.
Yes, that's correct. So by set amount, it would mean that based on the conservation practice you're applying, that practice is measured by a certain unit. So it might be linear feet, like they suggest. It could be square feet. It could be acres. Based on the planned application of the conservation practice. So this many acres of cover crop or this many square feet of cover crop on a small or urban operation. That will get applied by your state set payment rate. And that is how NRCS determines the maximum payment, but then it's cost share, and that cost share is based on a certain rate. And so you would not receive that full amount. You're going to receive a percentage portion of that amount. So if the cost share rate is 75%, you're going to get 75% of that multiplied calculation. If you are applying for some practices, they do kind of cap out at a certain amount. So no matter how many linear feet or how of well or how many square feet of high tunnel you want to construct, you can only get a maximum amount in your contract. In 2020, in North Carolina, the maximum amount for a high tunnel became $20,000, a huge increase from 2022, when I think it was only about 1,200.
And Jeffrey answered someone else's question. He said they had an excellent question. As policy changes, there may be opportunities to add activities to your CSP contract in the future. This is part of the streamlining effort by NRCS to make programs available make programs more similar, ask your local field office if it's possible prior to starting the practice.
Yeah.
And a lot of the other questions are asking about particulars of their actual
Okay.
operations.
Those are always such great learning examples for a lot of producers on calls like this, but due to time, we will say, could you hold your question? We're going to put a link in the chat where you can actually sign up for individualized technical assistance. And after such a widely attended webinar, please be patient about our follow-up with you. We will follow up with you as soon as we can due to the coming deadline. We also have TA providers in the Midwest for those of you in that region. And so if you're coming to us from states kind of outside of our traditional service area, and especially outside of our conservation expertise, we will lovingly refer you to one of these other trusted TA providers.
Really quick, we are not using the chat right now, but if you want to fill out that form for technical assistance, you can go to the RAFI website and to the NRCS section, and we will do our best to also email the link out after the webinar with the recording. Thanks for your patience.
Thanks, Stephanie. Okay, well, without further ado, we ask for your very brief feedback because this helps us develop future presentations, help farmers like yourselves, and it's also a critical place that you can provide some real-time feedback anonymously to USDA and NRCS about what you think of this regenerative pilot program. Is it good? Is it complicated? So please complete this survey here at your leisure for the last 4 minutes of the webinar. Oh, it'll show up. Okay, actually, I'm sorry. It will show up when the webinar ends.